Okay, welcome to today's Wise Talk. I'm here with James again. James, how you doing, mate?
Hello, very well. Very good to see you again.
Excellent. All right, so let's get straight into it. What's today's talk about, Ben? So today's talk is going to focus on how do we fix the fundamental problem with society. Right, in the last talk, we actually looked at what the fundamental problem of society actually is. And we'll quickly summarize it again just before we start, just to remind people who might not have seen that video what that fundamental issue was. Now, this is something that we had to highlight in a video all by itself, because a lot of people don't realize that humanity is literally competing against itself in the world. And they think that, they can maybe solve the problems by fixing or adjusting the economic system, or if politicians maybe were a bit nicer and cooperated a bit more in the world in different ways. But they always try and look at fixing the issues, but they overlook this fundamental problem that is actually behind all the core issues that we face in the world today. The fact that humanity literally is competing against itself. So in that video, we summarized what that actually was. And it came down to these points that we're highlighting in this particular slide. All right, that at all levels of society, we have nations that compete against each other for their own political and economic interests. So you always see this battle of economic sort of power going on between China and America, or maybe it's America and Russia, or some of the other countries that, again, always trying to compete against each other to advance their own political and economic interests within their own nations. But that is a constant battle going on between humans on these two different nations. Right? We see the same thing in governments. Governments want to advance their interests in their own nation. So that battle is constantly between the governments of these respective nations as well. We get this happening between political parties that are always battling to gain control of their own nations. And there's constant aggression between these political parties. And you see these political election campaigns, every year. Around the different parts of the world, and they often get very personal and very aggressive because, again, the interests are not aligned. We've got competing parties, competing interests, and therefore they're in a battle with each other to essentially win. Right? That's what competition encourages. It encourages winner-loser type of outcomes a lot of the times. Businesses are caught into this world as well, where businesses are trying to sell their goods and services around the world, competing against other businesses doing exactly the same thing a lot of the time, and trying to put each other out of business, So, and we see individuals do this in their jobs as well. They get caught up in this world of aggression and political-based economic power games that are being played out by different nations, and the competing interests on both sides trying to put other sides essentially out of business. So it's a crazy world we live in. Humanity is always constantly battling against itself in this world, and we explained that was actually the fundamental problem that exists in the world in the last video.
Yes, and we need to change this. It's not like we have a choice, really.
Exactly.
To survive as humanity, as a species, as people, we have to change. We have to end this competitive self-interest.
We talked about in that video as well, though. Remember, we talked about the idea that to end wars, the idea that governments say we can end wars, we can fix the problems. They can't. There's no way you can fix wars when you're competing against yourself as a people. Absolutely not, because that competition ultimately flares up and it creates the conflicts and it creates the wars. Right? Last century, 2 world wars. 2 world wars. Didn't learn from the first one, repeated the same mistake the second time. And it's not like we've learned from that mistake either. There's been more than 100 international conflicts since the Second World War as well. So we have never learned our lesson.
And if you look at the historical timeline and the historical research into wars, they usually are an accumulation of all of these, of nations against nations, governments against governments, political parties against political parties, business, the economy is a massive one that leads to wars. And individuals again, all of these things accumulate, come together and lead to wars.
To create conflicts and problems in the world constantly. So we emphasized all this in the last video, and we pointed out that because humanity is competing against itself, it leads to all these major problems in the world. And the question we were raising is, well, how do you expect to ever fix these problems? I mean, seriously fix them if you are always competing against yourself as a people. It's lunacy to think you can actually fix these problems if you won't stop competing against yourself as a people. And yet this is what we just continue to do year after year, decade after decade, century after century. Humanity just keeps competing against itself.
And people who are quite critical will often say, well, where are the examples of cooperation that works? But if you look in most people's communities, you'll find that most people are cooperating through the day, working together, friends with each other, sharing things with each other. Neighbours are very much like that. And also we see in organisations as well, like humanitarian organisations.
Exactly. And look, every now and again, when humanity has had some major problem that is essentially erupted in the world, like a major economic recession, like the last economic recession that occurred in 2000 and sort of, when was the last one, major one we had? Was it 2000? Wasn't 2008? Maybe it was
2009, wasn't it? 8, 9.
Yeah, around about that time. All right, but anyway, the point is the world, because of this major problem that was affecting all of the economies throughout the world. Oh yeah, we can come together, we can work through these issues, but then as soon as we work through them, we're back to competing against each other again. It's like, didn't you learn anything from that? Come on, people, seriously, get it together.
Yeah, when there's because
cooperate for a short time and then back to competition again.
They all came together to try and prevent
Crazy
a total catastrophe, but they didn't continue it. It wasn't.
Let's just go back to competition again straight after that.
So it shows it can be done. It shows even at that level.
It always shows it's possible, but they just don't follow through to the next level, which is let's do it permanently. Let's actually work out a new system here where we can cooperate, work together for our common good, and improve the world for all nations instead of always focusing on our own self-interest.
And that's quite interesting if you look at COVID as well.
Yeah,
there was a lot of example of ordinary people. I mean, so many levels of ordinary people, nurses, doctors, teachers, all working together, helping each other, that's extreme levels, really helping each other. But at the same time, there were self-interests at play. They were even using COVID as a means
exploiting
for competition.
It, wasn't it? For their own personal profit or personal gain. All right, anyway, we talked about how all these problems exist because of that one fundamental issue. So just to remind people again, it's because humanity is literally competing against itself. We have to stop doing that, all right? Now, in this video, the whole point of this video is to help people look at different strategies where people have tried to fix the problems in the world, but we're trying to highlight in this video that those strategies just don't work for the key reason that they don't really address this problem. That's the issue. They try to fix the problems in other ways, but they're all ineffective because one, they're not addressing this problem, and they're also just not adopting an intelligent approach that makes any real sense to fundamentally fixing the underlying issue here. All right, so let's look at it. How do people actually try to then fix the problem in society? The first one is the individual approach. You get some people, doing things like personal development courses. They'll study spiritual practices, religions, yoga. They'll take different types of paths to try to develop themselves as individuals and become better people. And that's all good. That's all great. The trouble is the percentage of people doing that is so small in the world that it doesn't have any real major impact in the overall system, the overall global system that we operate as human beings today, which is that competitive structure we're talking about.
And also people have to focus on other things. So even though they may be very interested in yoga, etc., they've got to think about their mortgages, about their jobs, etc.
Exactly.
So that's another problem.
The responsibilities of their families, everything else, and they just don't have real time to sort of look at, I think, half the time of the areas that we've often talked about that are fundamental to the problems that exist today. So the individual approach is good. It's great that it's there. The trouble is it would take literally centuries and centuries for people to get to a level that finally they understand, hey, this is what the problem is. We compete against ourselves. It's like we don't have centuries to work out these issues.
No.
We've got serious problems in the world today. We need a solution now, all right? And we need to come to our senses and adopt a more intelligent way of doing things. So the individual approach is good that people adopt it, but it's just not impactful enough in the world. It doesn't translate to a global transition that needs to be implemented there. So the second idea there is the education idea. Again, people basically try to use the education system to learn. and basically understand what the problems are. But education systems only teach what academics within that system have been taught themselves, and they tend to just replicate their own knowledge and their own experiences, and they don't often look outside the square, and they don't seem to understand the obvious thing that we're talking about in this video, that humanity itself is competing against itself as a people. How do you fix problems when you create that world, where you've got a world where you compete against each other that literally keeps creating the problems because you are competing against yourself, and we're not changing that system? And it's no good just saying that's the way the system is. That's rubbish. That's a ridiculous excuse. We can change that system anytime we want.
And there's also a contradiction or hypocrisy in the education system, because I remember when I was very young, teachers would talk about sharing, working together, cooperation. But as you get a bit older, move towards your teenage years, teachers begin to speak about competition, and fighting for jobs and security, and the job interview being competitive. So so you kind of put behind all the stuff you taught when you're very young, and you see it as a young thing, and it's left behind, and you go into the adult world, which is based on competition. So education just perpetuates that same.
It does. It's hypocritical in the way we do things. How can adults in this world say, hey, you should all cooperate and work together as students and as kids, and yet in our world we compete against each other all the time? It's nuts.
Absolutely.
So we're going to talk about briefly how that system doesn't work either. People try the protest path, protesting against governments, and we'll explain why that's ineffective too. Charities, they sometimes give up and sort of trying to protest to governments, and they just donate money to charities, say here you go. But charities look at the symptomatic issues, they don't fix the root cause, so that doesn't work. Some people hold out their hopes for technology to be a savior, like AI, artificial intelligence, and there's been a big sort of global campaign around artificial intelligence recently. And some people invest hopes into their local governments or their national governments to somehow magically solve things. But they're stuck in a world, well, they're not stuck in a world, they just refuse to change it. They're in a world where we are competing against each other as nations, and somehow think that they can fix problems in a world where we compete against ourselves. It's just lunacy, So we're going to drill into these areas one by one. All right, so the individual path we just talked about briefly. Yeah, we mentioned this idea that some individuals try and take a path in their life where they will adopt an approach that helps them become more intelligent human beings, wiser human beings. And that's great. It's great that people try to go down that path and try to adopt a wiser approach to doing things. But as we said, that can take years and years of dedication and practice, and not everyone's got that time to do that. So if you were trying to scale that up to the rest of the world, and a lot of people just don't even have an inclination, a passion and an interest to try to become better human beings in their own lives. Most people are just willing to go and do their typical jobs, pay their bills, and just enjoy their lives as much as possible, then die at the end of it, and say, that's it, that was my life. So they're not really looking to try and fix the problems as such. They're just going to deal with whatever comes their way. So there's not enough numbers, not enough people in society supporting that approach towards personal development, and that's why that idea is not effective, because it can literally take centuries and centuries and centuries for humanity to sort of get to that level.
And it's a generational thing as well, because people pass down information, beliefs, ideas through generations upon generations, and never question them. They never question. They just continue. So sometimes generations have some wisdom, but most of the time it's based on the same ignorance, that's been passed down, and it just goes without even. So it's kind of almost a given, isn't it? It's a given.
Well, but the crazy thing, you think about politicians. If you're talking to any politician, they were being honest about things. They'd all say, the government system we have is rubbish. It doesn't work. The political system we've got doesn't work either. A whole competitive economic system doesn't work either. They'll acknowledge that all these things don't work. But then why don't we then put a better and more intelligent system in place? What would that be? And they just don't think beyond it, and so they think, well, surely we can come up with something better than this. I mean, if we are the so-called most intelligent species on this planet, well, I'm sure we can do better than this average competing system that we've got here. That is not helping to improve the world at all.
Yeah, but there's two areas in relation to that. One is that people don't think there's another way, do they? They've been told so many times that this is the way it is, that the status quo is the way it is.
Exactly.
and it's a given. Nothing else is possible. And
Yeah.
also those who do talk about something that is new, they are often shouted down
Yeah. Yeah.
when it's an individual person,
Yeah.
which is why it's so important for this collective. If you think about the population, you think how many people are together that can change things. You know,
Exactly.
at a collective level, things can really make a difference.
Yeah, through experience, I think both you and I would agree with this, and I'm sure people watching this video would agree with this too. Governments, as a general rule, often do not implement serious changes that will make a big difference in the world unless the people of their populations collectively work together to say, you're going to do this, and we're not going to accept any excuses.
Yes, and
Because
they do it.
yeah, they eventually do it. They implement it, because it takes that kind of pressure though, which is ridiculous. Again, if you had the right kind of people in governments, wiser, more intelligent human beings in governments, they would do this straight away. There's
I,
there's no we wouldn't even question the idea of implementing a global model, as we're going to eventually talk about,
well,
but because
well,
it's such a
yes.
straightforward, obvious thing to do.
Why should we keep protests? Why should we need to protest? We should
Exactly.
literally just be able to do it.
Yeah, if you've got the right people in governments, which we clearly don't, they would just implement the right solution straight away. But yeah, that's another story. So because there's not enough people trying to develop themselves and become more wiser, intelligent human beings and understand what the fundamental problems are in the world today, we don't get any changes in the world. It's just repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again, decade after decade, generation after generation, century after century. And if you look at this humanity as a species, we have repeated the same wars, the same conflicts, the same poverty, the same greed, the same self-interest, the same just ignorance constantly. We've never grown as a species in that sense. People would say, oh, but we've got basically sort of better technology these days. We've got better technologies, but have human beings really become wiser, more compassionate, more loving, more intelligent human beings? Not really.
Yeah, it is true that we tiptoe, but it's so slow, isn't it? It's like the change is so minor.
Anyway,
When you think back of how much we've changed, it's so small
yeah. So
in comparison to the potential,
yeah,
which is
exactly.
huge.
So while this is great, and it would be fantastic if every typical human being on the planet was doing this sort of stuff, it doesn't happen, and that's why it's ineffective as a solution. Right, this next idea is the education approach, as we said. People try to somehow just teach students in schools and help educate them about the problems in the world. But what is a problem here is they're not talking about the fundamental problem. Look at the top there. It says, as a people, humanity is competing, right? As a people, humanity is competing against itself. This is the fundamental problem. If academic institutions were talking about that problem, said, look, we want you to understand something as students in our school or our college. We want you to understand that humanity as a species is literally competing against itself as a species. Now, we want you to ask you a question. How can you fix the world's problems if you're going to compete against yourself as a species? And I want you to answer that. It wouldn't. How? It can't be done. That's the whole point. It can't be done. Until you stop competing against yourself, you cannot fix the world's problems. They're just going to keep continuing.
Yes.
Wealth inequality is just going to keep growing and growing and growing until something explodes.
Well, yeah, this links to school as well, in the sense that as a teacher, we often do these things where we put students into groups, and one group where they work together to solve certain problems. And you often find the ones that compete a lot always go wrong. So everything kind of goes wrong. It takes some time to do anything. They fall out with each other over this, that, and the other.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
But the ones that work together and they're good friends and they work together, they get on, they succeed and they get the achievements and they
Yeah.
win. So
Exactly.
even within that competitive framework, the ones that cooperate succeed.
Yeah. The
So
ones that
that,
sort of decide to take the more intelligent path, the more the wiser path here and cooperate and work together, they're the ones that are going to succeed and achieve the outcomes.
absolutely.
Anyway, so there we go. It's because it's not really discussed in the education system that nothing changes on that side. They teach knowledge-related subjects in the education system, right? English, maths, science, computing, all those sort of knowledge subjects, but they're not teaching the self-knowledge subjects. What is the fundamental problem with society? How do we fix it? What is the purpose of life? These are fundamental questions that
Yeah.
every human being should understand and
Yeah.
should be encouraged to look at more deeply so that they can address the problems in the world that they live in today instead of just ignoring them, going, oh, that's just the way it is. You know?
And another thing, this type of education is not based on just passing out information. It's based on them understanding themselves, isn't it?
Yeah,
Questioning things themselves, having their own insights into the nature of life, etc. Rather than
exactly.
it just be beliefs being passed down.
Exactly. Just to
Or
being
maybe,
told, hey, this is the way you should look at the world. You need to go and get a job, go earn a living, go pay your bills, and that's all your life is going to be amount to, which is, again, ridiculous. And it's probably the worst thing you can tell to a student. This is as good as your life is going to get. You know, humanity is capable of so much more than the kind of education that is taught in the world today. So much more. And yet, this is what a lot of politicians and academics want to educate our future generations with, that this is as good as you can achieve. Rubbish. We can achieve a world that is everything that we could possibly dream it can be. We
uh,
just need to implement a better
yeah.
system to achieve it.
And you often see students really find very little interest in many of the subjects that exist that are being passed down through generations.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
often switch off, they'd rather go on their mobile phone. And that can be a frustration because you know
yeah.
full well if you was to teach these kind of things, they would actually be interested and they'd find it quite fascinating.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. I know that having talked to a number of students in this area in the past myself, they are very fascinated by these subjects. Right, so how long would it take global education institutions to include important subjects like wisdom and self-knowledge in their curricula? Again, years, decades, if ever. One of the problems and the challenges of trying to get the ideas that we're talking about in this video into the academic institutions is they resist it. They often will resist anything new that's outside the accepted curriculum because they'll say, well, we're not allowed to teach that because it might rattle too many people's cages.
Yeah.
Or they might say, oh, what are you teaching this idea for? Because, we've never heard of this idea. Explain it to us. So because often academic institutions don't want to sort of rock the boat and, wake people up in a sense to the realities of how things could be done so much better in this world. They'll tiptoe around things all the time. They'll stay away from anything that could be even in a minor level controversial, which is not. The idea that we're suggesting a global model that we're going to talk about in one of the videos coming up shortly is in any way controversial is ridiculous.
Yeah, because if you was to show students the development of the tribal, the local, the national,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
ask them, not telling them, you wouldn't tell them that we were going to have a global model. You would ask them questions about, do you think
Yeah.
humanity should develop?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
they would then come to their own
Yeah.
insights.
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
obviously, yeah, we need to do that. But
Exactly.
they literally don't want young people to question whether we should have anything greater or better
Better
than
than the
what we
kind of
have.
system we've got today.
Yeah,
And what would
absolutely.
it take to implement such a system? And that again is a ridiculously easier thing to do. So
Mm.
anyway, let's move forward. But it's a challenge trying to even get these ideas into the education system because the education system is resistant to change as well most of the time.
Yes.
Right, next thing people try and do, protests. They try and protest to governments time and time and time and time again about any injustices that they see in society or things are not being done in the way that they can see that they would be a lot better. So too many governments got major problems in the world today. There's a lot of governments that have been, in my opinion, hijacked by different individuals. They've hijacked the governments in those nations. They are basically not implementing the wisest solutions because of basically vested interests from corporate companies and different lobby groups that are involved in governments and have close connections to them. So a lot of the sensible decisions that could be implemented by individual nations to improve the state of the world, or where nations can come together and unite to implement a global model, are just not even considered because they're being corrupted left, right, and sideways by vested interests, by certain individuals. It's just the government political system of the world is got major problems, major problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And every time they protest, okay, it doesn't mean that they are 100% useless. There are times where they make minor changes,
Minor,
but it
yeah.
never truly. What the question is why should people need to protest.
Yeah, yeah.
Why should humanity, peoples on this planet, in nation states, why should...
Constantly have to protest again and again and again. If we had wiser people in governments, as you know, then they'd be doing the right thing from the get-go. They'd be making the right
Absolutely.
decisions. They'd be implementing solutions that could sort of unite nations and get nations to work together, because this is how an intelligent species would operate, right? But we don't have that in governments.
Absolutely. And it
And
is
if you're relying on governments, if we're relying on governments to sort of lead us, to a better
yeah.
world, good luck with that.
And governments are, particularly in the Western world, governments are supposed to be there for the people. It's this idea that we have governments, we elect governments, that they are there to represent the people, representative that's supposed to represent. But if we have to keep protesting, then clearly it's not representative. So at some point there needs to be a change where we should no longer need to protest. We should basically be able to implement what is necessary for
We'll
our
just
survival.
I think we'd just be all be better off if politicians and all governments around the world just be honest about things and say, look, we can't fix these problems. We can't. So, hey, we'd like an idea from you guys to let us know how you think we can fix the world's problems, because we can't.
Yes.
I know we've got poverty
agree.
issues. I know we've got all these problems basically with wars and conflicts because of these competing interests all the time. We can't fix this. So, hey, give us some ideas. Help us out here. Well, that's what this video is about. We're going to help you out here because you clearly need the help.
Yes.
Right. So what is a protest? It's, usually involves a public rally in protest of a government policy of some sort, national protests. And depending on how restrictive that government is or how corrupt that government is, they might lock down those protests big time. They'll pull out all their basically defense mechanisms. They'll use their military, their police, and they'll shut it down before it even gets gets a chance to even be heard. And some governments around the world are a lot like that, as you well know. Yeah. Other governments that like to think of themselves as democracies, they'll tolerate it, but do they ever really do much about it? Not unless there's massive, overwhelming support from the people in that nation to try to achieve some sort of goal. But it always gets back to, I think, your key point, which is, why should we have to keep the people? Why should the people have to keep doing this again and again and again? It's like, if you had intelligence and wisdom in your job role, you'd already be doing the right thing for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Clearly you don't.
And when something is clearly wrong, so it's not about someone's opinion, this opinion or that opinion. When something is clearly wrong, morally, ethically wrong, then we shouldn't need to protest.
Exactly.
We should literally be able to...
Governments that keep sending weapons around the world, which they know is encouraging wars and conflicts and killing people. They know that's happening. Do they stop it? No, because it's in the from their point of view, economic interest to keep doing it. And, the decisions that are morally corrupt because of the way that the world has got that competing system again is what's causing the issues. That competitive structure brings out the worst behavior in humanity, the worst possible behavior. And that is fundamentally one of the core problems here. Anyway, let's move through. So do protests work? Depends. They have to have a massive, overwhelming support to have any real impact. Otherwise, governments will just ignore them and not do anything about them typically at all. So often no change to the world at all when protests occur. The next one, people donating money to charities. And again, we've said, look, while that helps to stem the problems from getting from bad to worse and just getting totally out of control, the charities are trying to hold the world together from just complete destruction.
Yeah, you could
it's
use...
symptomatic. It's not actually addressing the root problem.
Yeah, you could use a metaphor for this in the sense that charities do a great job being bandages. So they're a great job. If somebody bang their arm or have got some
injured
problem,
themselves, they stem the flow of the
it's good bandages, but they don't go to surgery. Surgery would be solving the cause of the problem. Whereas charities only focus on the symptoms, which are the bandages. And we do need to solve the actual root of the problem.
So two nations will go basically to war. The Red Cross will then come in and try and pick up the pieces of all the destruction and the loss of lives and everything else.
That is great. That is great. That is coming from...
It shows the compassionate nature again of human beings. But we need to stop acting introspectively in these situations and be more proactive and stop creating these problems in the first place.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, so we've got to do better than this. We're not doing anywhere near as good as we should be as adults and, responsible adults. You know, I've got young kids, and the reality is they look up to the adults in the world to try to live more intelligently and more sensibly in the world. And are we living up to that level, that standard? No, we're letting them down. You know,
Absolutely.
I think every adult in this world should be looking at the video that we're producing here and sort of be honest about it and say, you know, we're doing a rubbish job. As adults in this world, we are doing a rubbish job. We can do so much better than what we're doing today.
Yeah.
And I personally feel that every adult leader in this world should be ashamed of themselves in terms of what they're delivering towards the standards that, exist in the world today, when we're capable of doing so much better.
Yes, and it's interesting because leaders often talk about the future and say, when I look back, I don't want my grandchildren, I think we should have done this, we should have done that, but then they don't do it. So it's kind of like this, they talk a good job.
They never talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk, mate.
No,
and that's
because of the economic self-interest, the competition between nation states.
And they just don't have the solution. They don't know how to fix the problems. And that's what this video is about. We're trying to help people understand, first of all, what the fundamental issues are, what people then try to do to address those, which we're trying to say, look, these ideas won't work. They just don't work for these reasons. All right. So charities, great to have them here, but they're only looking at the symptoms of the fallout of all the problems. They're not actually addressing the root cause. The root cause is humanity competes against itself. How are charities fixing that? How are charities changing that position? We're not. They're not.
No.
So if it's great to help STEM do damage limitation, as the slide says, but do they fix the root cause? No. So that's not helping. It's only just stopping things from going from bad to worse. People invest their hopes in some sort of magical technology to somehow fix humanity because, we don't know what we're doing. Human beings have got no idea what we're doing half the time, and somehow technology is going to come along and we're going to magically use that technology to fix everything. No. In a competitive world, a technology is going to get used for both good and bad reasons. All right. Those people with moral sort of focus in their approach to life will try and use technology in a positive and useful way to help serve society. Those people that work in corrupt institutions, security agencies where they're trying to attack and take advantage of other nations' weaknesses and exploit those weaknesses for their own, basically, nation's best interests, will use those technologies in an aggressive sort of computer hacking approach, security sort of, approach to sort of gather information about those nations so they can exploit it. They're going to use all these technologies for the wrong reasons. And they'll justify it to themselves. Don't have any doubts about that. But it'll be done for the wrong kind of reasons, the wrong moral approach.
Yeah.
So that's what you get when you have a competitive world, because the interests are, we're going to look after our nation's interests first, and to do that, we're going to use this technology for our own personal gain.
Yeah, it's like anything. It's like technology and science can be used either for fantastic, for ethical, for wise things, or it can be used for destructive things and for corrupt things. I mean, look at, say, nuclear weapons, those kind of things, all sorts of different arms sales, all sorts of genetic modification as well.
Yeah, GMOs and all the rest of it. It's humanity, like I said, in a competitive world, that's always going to be your outcome, because your focus is serving your own interests or serving your nation's interests or serving the interests of your business or whatever it might be. But it's self-interest. That's the focus. Because it's going to get used for the wrong reasons.
And not getting technology to work for the whole, for the Earth as a whole, as another process as the Earth. And that basically makes it integrated with the ecosystem, not separate from the ecosystem, as a separate thing, as part of the whole.
So in a global competitive society, will artificial intelligence be used sensibly? How will governments, security agencies, weapons manufacturers use it? It's obvious they're going to use it for all the wrong reasons. Totally obvious, right? And that's what people need to understand. So technology is not going to come to our rescue. If anything, it would actually be a potential destruction. As humanity develops the knowledge to build ever more powerful and potentially destructive weapons and technologies, then some agencies, governments, and institutions in the world will use them in the wrong way. That's inevitable, absolutely inevitable, right? You develop a technology, it will ultimately be used in the wrong way by somebody, whether it's governments using nuclear weapons, which they've done, whether it's certain other governments using chemical weapons, which they've done. Yeah, they'll always use that technology for destructive purposes in some respect. And we need to understand that.
And then you've also got it outside of the military complex. You've also got it on the economic side, where they just produce plastics and trash things that really just pollute the environment. And technology can make that more and more, but it can basically make consumerism more and more the case.
Yeah.
And so we're going to see technology being used not just for the military side, but also for the consumption side, which obviously is destructive for the earth.
Exactly. All right, so technology is not going to be a great savior. Now, the final thing some people do is just put all their hopes in their own national governments and say, hey, you're our national government, you're supposed to represent us as a people, and you're supposed to be implementing ideas that will fix all of our problems for us in our everyday lives. Yeah, good luck with that. That's never happened and never been the case, all right? For literally centuries, humans have struggled and struggled and struggled with poverty, with wars, and with conflicts. And you just get the same repeating political parties and governments in control of these countries and nations over time, whether it's the Republicans and the Democrats in America who have been at it constantly for the last 150 years. Yeah, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Have they solved the problems in America? No. The problems in America are the same. Got crime, they've got poverty, they've got all the same issues. They've never fixed them because they can't.
Yeah, and even very occasionally you get a decent government, which happens now and again. They are still limited by the actual system.
Yeah, because they're stuck in a global system with all the other nations.
They have to compromise at such a level that what they originally said in their manifesto literally all goes out the window. Yeah. And they have to they compromise to such a level that they become just like the other governments that were not decent. Yeah. And so you see it's actually a global problem that requires obviously global solutions.
Governments have existed in this system for absolutely ages, and often the same political parties have been in these nations for a long, long, long time, more than 100 years in some cases. The UK's had the same political parties, Labour and the Conservative Party, for the past 100 years. Back and forward, back and forward, back and forward. Every election cycle, we flick to this party. Okay, no, we're not happy with you guys. Let's go back to this one. Oh, you guys are okay, but no, we're going to go back to this one. Back and forth. The people in the UK say their lives have become magically, much better over the years and the decades. No, it's got major problems with poverty, crime, like every other nation in the world. The problems that exist in these various nations that have had the same governments back and forth, back and forth, back and forth all the time have never, ever been fixed. And often it's just getting worse. And because the wealth inequality gaps keep getting wider and wider all the time.
And when you look at the potential, going back to the potential of humanity again, when you look at the potential that we have to literally unite together and transform
fix everything. Exactly.
And explore not just this earth, but the unknown as well. We can clearly see how primitive we are remaining in this competitive structure.
This is the undeniably, and again, frustrating thing with the way governments operate in the world. It is so easy to fix the world's problems, and yet governments propagate the same issues over and over again, decades, without looking beyond the foolishness of a system and saying, how can we do it better? How can we do it better for not just ourselves, but for everybody? And that's what we're going to put forward to people. We're going to help people understand that there's a much better system that we can implement here that will benefit every nation.
Everybody is everybody. So this idea, well, I can't do it by myself, but you are somebody, you are everybody. And if everybody realizes that, we can really bring that momentum.
Unity in numbers, mate. Unity in numbers. When we bring a lot of people together with this idea, they will understand that we've got the power to really change things in the world. And you can't just keep propagating the same system that exists today because it will never, ever fix anything. So, governments don't change anything either. They just propagate the same patterns of behavior from previous decades into the next because they've got no ideas. because they're always looking within the existing system, thinking, well, how do we fix you can't fix things with the existing system. You've got to look beyond that. You've got to think, okay, this doesn't work. So how could we create a world that's going to benefit our nation and all nations and actually work together for everybody? That's what we've got to, it's a very simple thing. All right, so let's just summarize the key reasons as to why these ideas don't actually work. All right, so we talked about that first one, the individual approach. What is great that humans want to try to obviously improve themselves and become wiser, more intelligent, and sort of, raise their standards. That can take years and years and years for people to try to, elevate themselves to a higher level of wisdom and understanding, where they truly understand the problems in the world, and then will hopefully try and take some action to try to address them and fix them. But there's just not enough people engaged in that kind of process in their everyday life, as you pointed out, right? It's just, you were saying that they're wrapped up in their own jobs, their own lives, their own family commitments, responsibilities, and most people just don't have time, a lot of the time, to try and look at their own self-development and their self, how they can become wiser and more compassionate and, more intelligent human beings. So that approach doesn't tend to work for that reason.
No.
The education system approach that we talked about here, sorry, give me 1 second, there we go. So that one's not going to work. The education approach also, we said, wouldn't work because the academic approach is not really sharing the kind of ideas we're talking about in this video. The academic approach is to often just propagate ideas that have been, held as the sort of way to do things in previous generations and previous decades. So because they don't come up with anything new to say, hey, maybe we should try a completely different approach to fixing the world's problems, because none of his other ideas work. Radical concept, I know, but there you go. And this is an idea which, from my point of view anyway, I'd love to see education systems actually talking about and trying to educate students on better, because then they would realize that this is actually really important for students to understand, that if they could discuss with students that as a people, humanity keeps competing against itself. And, the worst case we've seen in that scenario, in my opinion, was when the states in America were competing against themselves for ventilators during the COVID crisis. That was the worst case of competing self-interest I think you could probably come across. You've got major health and medical issues that you're trying to address for your own people in your nation there. And you've got states competing against each other to get access to these ventilators. Competition and self-interest is stupid in its approach, but that takes it to the real extreme example of how stupid it really gets in that situation.
Yeah, we see the education system does not promote wiser cooperative ideas. It promotes the idea of competition.
Yeah,
you're going to
capitalism.
Basically get a good job.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
compete for that position.
Yeah,
they do when you're younger, but as you get older, it seems to become less and less of a thing. It becomes more about getting ahead and being competitive, rather than working together and solving problems collectively.
Yeah, collectively, exactly. So we talked about that wasn't going to work here, but protests, again, often fall on deaf ears. Governments often don't want to hear what the people, their own people they're supposed to represent, have got to say, because they're often being influenced by lobby groups, by outside corporate interests, etc., etc. So they've already made up their mind about what they want to do, and frankly, what often the people have to say is like, nah, we don't want to hear what you've got to say. We've been elected. Thanks very much. Just be quiet now.
And
let us just do our own thing.
And the people should not need to protest. The people should, if they have a representative government, they should not need to protest. The government should be doing what they want.
They should be implementing the right moral decisions for the right moral reasons, right? And obviously implementing the wisest decisions that work for not hopefully just their own nation, but for all nations. But that's where it's lacking in governments, as we've often talked about.
And a lot of the time when things are just morally and ethically wrong, that everyone can agree upon is wrong, then we shouldn't need to protest about those things. Okay, on opinion, different opinion on things, different political opinions, protests may take place. But on things that are clearly morally
wrong, like selling weapons around the world and things like that. These things should not be happening. The way governments try and justify that by saying, well, it's in our economic interest to sell weapons. which you know are going to get used to kill people. And it's like, how do you live with yourselves with that kind of decision making? It's crazy. But they'll say, well, people lose their jobs. You know what? We need to find more intelligent jobs then. We need to find a better way of doing things, because that doesn't justify that decision. I'm sorry. That's still morally and totally ethically and foolishly, totally incorrect. Totally wrong decision.
And it's an example where global economic and global competitive forces take precedence
Exactly.
over what everybody considers to be morally
Humans
wrong.
know right. This is the thing about it. We know right from wrong. It's built into us essentially as into our own natures. We know right from wrong. So we are constantly making wrong decisions because of this competitive structure. As we talked about, it brings out the worst of human behavior.
Absolutely.
Instead of a system that we have in the world today should encourage us to be the best that we can be. It should help us elevate ourselves to a higher level of humanity. And yet we use a system that drops us down to the lowest level. We've got to kind of almost fight against that to ethically and morally make the right decisions.
Well, going back to the individual one, number one, is people want to focus on self-improvement and those things.
Yeah.
But it forces the worst in people to focus on competition and self-interest. Even things that are like self-improvement often are distorted in the more competitive direction. So it's not until we actually change the system itself will these things actually improve at a level that's needed.
All right. The next idea we talked about was charities. But charities, as we said, they're all symptomatic in their approach. So you've got the Red Cross, you've got Greenpeace, you've got all these charity organizations and humanitarian organizations that are trying to help change things, but really they're just focusing on the major problems that exist and just trying to fix those individual problems. But at the top here, you've got the governments making all these terrible decisions. You've got this competitive system, political and competitive economic system, and it's raining down onto the world all of these constant problems all the time. And all we're doing of his charities are down the bottom here, just trying to stop all these things from creating destruction in the world.
Well, once again,
lives.
You could use the analogy of a doctor and the metaphor where really charities are bandages, aren't they? Bandages to problems, whereas surgery are solving the root causes.
Yeah, you might need to look at the root cause of the issue.
Yeah, so really charities are only like bandages. They're doing great things and we should always look at them and have respect and admiration for them. Yeah. But unfortunately, it's only on the surface where they are bandaging.
If a charity was focused on that core point there that we're actually mentioning right here, if a charity was focused on this idea here and saying, we're going to fix that, then that would be a charity that makes a real difference in the world.
And charities working together to fix this would literally could transform
the world totally. Absolutely transform the world totally. All right, then we talked about this idea that AI technology or some sort of technology will become the savior of humanity. It's like, I'm sorry, human beings, we're just incompetent individuals and we can't fix our own problems, but we've got to have some technology fix it for us. So it's again that the trouble again in the competitive world is that those incompetent individuals are going to use technology for the wrong reasons, and ultimately that technology will be used for destructive purposes and it's going to cause problems. We have never used technologies that could be used for positive reasons in the world. We've never used that technology in that one sort of context only. If you look at weapons we've created, like nuclear weapons, ultimately somebody pushes the button and uses that nuclear weapon as it has been done twice before.
Well, I mean, if you look at technology and science, it can be used for fantastic, ethical, great things for the good of the earth, for the good of humanity, or it can be used for destructive things. I mean, you look at, say, we mentioned military arms sales, but also on the consumer side, on consumerism, plastics, and the speed, the creation of consumerism at a level
that causes excessive destruction.
Yeah,
there's a lot of wastage, total wastage, because of a consumerist system that we operate
and this is going to get worse and worse under a competitive system.
Well, as population numbers continue to increase as well, it's humanity can't maintain this kind of world. It just will not function. It won't work.
It's not sustainable, basically.
Exactly. It's just not.
Global competitive system.
So the last idea we discussed is that some people put all their hopes in governments are just going to magically fix everything. But I'm sorry, you've had the same governments for centuries in some cases. The UK, the US have had the same governments respectively, the UK, 100 years, right? The US, 150 years. 150 years, the Republicans and the Democratic parties have been in power of politics within the US. 100 years, the Conservative Party and Labour have been in power in the UK. And would either one of the peoples in either one of those nations say their worlds become magically better because these two political parties have dominated the political spectrum in their own nations? No.
Yeah, and even when you very occasionally, it does occasionally take place, you get a decent government. They get into government and they have to move more and more. They have to compromise more and more and become almost the same as the non-decent governments because they have to compromise. So, and that is, and they have to throw the manifesto out the window. And that is because they have to adapt to the global competitive process.
The global status quo.
Yeah, so even if you vote for one that are potentially decent, they still have to compromise to this global economic competitive system.
Exactly. All right, so we've said that, look, all of his ideas, they just will not work to fix the world's problems, all right? Because none of them, as we discussed here, which is really important for people to understand, none of them are addressing that root cause problem right there. If they don't address that problem, they can't fix anything. Now,
and this is a direct observation. It's not an ism. It's not any kind of.
Exactly.
It's no belief system or ideology. It's
No,
a pure observation.
Simple reality of what we're dealing
human
with.
Development.
Exactly. So there is a solution to this, though. Even though none of those approaches are going to fix that fundamental problem, and therefore they can't actually truly fix the world's problems, there is a solution. But it means doing things in a different way than we've been doing them for decades, and in some cases centuries, and that is to implement a global model. Now, global model is, we need to create a whole video here to explain this to people and help them better understand what a global model really is. But it's time for humanity to take this next step in its social evolution and adopt a more intelligent and a wiser approach to approaching the challenges that we face today, because we live in a global world, and the reality is a global world requires a global solution to address the problems that we face today.
Yes, and if you go back to what you put together previously about local or tribal, local, national, and then if you ask most people questions, students or adults as well, you ask them clearly, what is the next stage? Local, tribal, local, national. What's the next one? Most people will say global.
Yeah.
When they actually think about it clearly,
exactly.
They actually say, oh yeah, obviously it's global. That's just the natural progression.
So we're going to talk more about that, and we can see how this is the natural next step in our social evolution as a people.
Yes.
And we just need to take that step. So it's an incredibly important step for us as a species at this point.
And I can quickly say that we can choose two directions, can't we? We can choose the direction of a long time, where we go through more pain, conflict, suffering, and eventually get to the global cooperative model. Or we can realize earlier, well, it's the wisest thing.
We just take the wise approach and just implement it now. What are we waiting for? I mean, if all these governments and political leaders say they want to fix the world's problems, well, let's do it, because this solution will fix every major problem in the world today. Right. So if you want to find out more about it, check out the website. You'll see there the video is already available there of essentially what is a global model, why is the global model the only solution, or you can click on the link at the end of this video. Right, so we'll talk about that in a new video, because it requires a bit more discussion to explain exactly what a global model is, and we'll also answer a few other questions about a global model there as well. But to fix the world's problems, you have to address the root cause. Humanity is competing against itself. If governments and politicians are not addressing that, they're not fixing anything. They'll tell people we're going to make your lives better, but they're not fixing anything truly, and it's just maintaining the status quo. And that's not going to work if you want to truly fix the world's problems. Right, so that's basically, we're going to discuss this in the next video. Why does a global model fix this broken world? Right, we've got a video that explains exactly what a global model is and why it psychologically and practically makes perfect sense for basically all nations, all right, how it can benefit all nations and fix all the problems for every single nation in the world today. James, as always, basically it's great to see you again.
Yeah, and you too. It's been really good.
We'll pop out back and talk about this in the next video.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Take care.
Nice to see you guys. Take
Too.
care. We'll see you in
Take
the next
care.
video. Cheers.
Bye.